They will fight. He smiled grimly. It would shame them not to. Your God, my lady, must be a mighty warrior to inspire such courage. A hysterical laugh caught in my throat. No, I said, half choking on it. But he is a prodigious lover. Believe me, Ura Uzag, in this place it is the more dangerous of the two. That quote is from roughly the center of Kushiel's avatar, and it embodies the essence of the love that stands at the center of the Dangeline universe. It is a love of sweetness and grace and beauty, yes, but it is also a hard truth, a call to arms, a demand to do more, to be more. And in all its contradictions, it is a love that invites us as readers to examine what it means to love and to what absurd lengths it will drive you. Welcome to It Is That Deep, and our final installment in Jacqueline Carey's Kushiel Legacy series, Kushiel's Avatar. As always on this channel, spoiler warning. Everything will be told. No secrets will be held back. The story will be laid open. You have been warned. Okay, let's get into it. Just a quick recap of where we are in the series. In Kushiel's Dart, we are introduced to Fedre no Dolene, courtesan, spy, and anguizette, chosen by Kushiel, god of sacred pain. She goes on a whirlwind adventure to unravel the schemes of her nemesis and former lover, Melisande Shahrazai. In this book, we are also introduced to Hyacinth, or Hyas, who is Fedre's oldest friend, one of the Tsigano people, and he gives up his freedom for Fedre's sake, taking her place as the apprentice of the Master of Straits. The Master of Straits is a position of power that controls the rough seas between Alba and Terra de Ange, and importantly, the Master of Straits is cursed to age without dying. In Kushiel's Chosen, the second book, Fedre finds Melisande, and Melisande is forced to take sanctuary in the temple of Asherat to prevent her arrest and execution. During the course of Book 2, Melisande married Prince Benedict, Queen Ysandra's uncle, and had a child with him, Prince Imriel. The child was vanished by a priest of Eloah and is missing to the world, although not to Melisande, as we'll discover. And that brings us to Book 3, Kushiel's Avatar, and honestly my favorite in the series. In the early part of the book, there is a transfer of power between the old Master of Straits and Hyacinth. Hyacinth becomes the Master of Straits. We learn that Fedre is still trying to find a way to free him from that curse. She's learned the name of the one god of the Yesuites can banish Rahab, the angel who laid the curse in the first place. But finding that name eludes her. The only thing she has really learned is this. To receive the one God's name, she must approach him in perfect trust and love, to make of the self a vessel where the self is not. Which is a very cryptic statement that we'll come back to. Okay, then comes a letter from Melisande asking for Fedre's help. And so Fedre goes to Cardici Unitas, to the temple of Asherat, and there she learns that Prince Imriel was being raised, ignorant of his heritage, in an isolated shrine of Eloah's. Melisande's plan was for Imriel to emerge as the goat-herd prince and claim the throne in his adulthood. But he had been taken. No one knew where, and Melisande's agents couldn't find him. He just vanished. She begs Fedre for help and offers in return the location of the tribe of Dan, who are said to know the name of the one god. Essentially, if Fedre will go search for Imriel, Melisande will help her free Hyacinth. Well, and so, we go questing for Imriel. At first, Fedre thinks that it was a political scheme of some sort, but investigation brings this to light. No. This was just a bad thing that happened. Some Carthaginian slavers crept into Terra de Ange and stole 3 children from the sanctuary to sell them. So, Phaedra and Jocelyn recover two of the children in Aragonia, but not Emriel. He has been taken to Meneket, which is very far away, essentially the Egypt of the world of Terre d'Ange. So off to Meneket they go. During this part of the journey, Phaedra is growing angry with her gods. She feels that they have used a child, an innocent, to punish Melisande. This bad thing that happened to him, it feels like a bad thing that is divinely inspired by Phaedra's patron, Kushiel, the Punisher. Okay, so a long journey later, we learn that Imriel has been sold to a man called the Kierkegaard, who rules Drujan, also known as Darsanga, the kingdom that lived and died. This was a kingdom that had been invaded by the Akkadians, and essentially an atrocity had been committed during that invasion, and in that atrocity had been born the Kierkegaard, a man who has unleashed the dark side of a faith based on Zoroastrianism. Angry Manu and the threefold path of evil, dark thoughts, dark words, dark deeds, rules in Darsanga. And it is said the Kierkegaard searches for the perfect victim. When they learn all this, it seems that the quest is over, because the Akkadians won't let anyone go to Darsanga. They've tried with two armies. Both armies failed because of the dark magic of the Skotafagoti priests. So everyone with Phaedra is like, well, that's it. The boy is lost. But that's when the gods speak to Phaedra fairly directly. And I'm just going to read the passage here. It is said the Kierkegaard searches for the perfect victim. What was Kushiel's chosen, if not that? Oh no, I thought. Blessed Eloah, no. It is too much to ask, too much. And even as I thought it, the emptiness was filled. A vast, inrushing presence of joy and love and light, more light than I could bear. It swelled within me, lovely and unbearable. Filled with presence, I was vastened, conscious of an overarching pattern that encompassed all of life within it, all of love, love and all that it entailed, the complicated ties that bound us to one another, that begat life, loyalty, compassion, and sacrifice in its truest sense. I had not believed it possible until then. I did not think it possible for a mortal being to contain such glory. What was it that filled me? Not Kushiel, no, not Namaha, but Eloah, blessed Eloah, the bright shadow whom they all followed, all of them, revealing at last the immensity of his plan, filling and surrounding me, golden and irresistible, filling my soul with radiant light, filling my mouth with a taste of honey, setting my heart beating like a hummingbird's wings. Yes, yes, yes. Now, she still tries to say no, and so the gods all threaten to leave her, to take all of that with them and leave her just mortal. And that's when she bows to their will. And she convinces Jocelyn, her partner and lover, to sell her to the Kierkegaard. And in addition, Jocelyn must swear himself to the Kierkegaard's service. And this is what they do, without any kind of a plan as to what they'll do when they get there. All Phaedra knows is that the gods have commanded her to do this, and so she plunges into Darsanga on faith alone. And that brings us to about the halfway mark through the book, and here I want to pause and speak about Kierkegaard's fear and trembling. Because this, right here, this moment when Phaedra says yes to a command that terrifies her, that no sane moral code could justify, this is Kierkegaardian territory. But before we dive in, we should address the elephant in the room. Isn't fear and trembling basically divine command theory? It's about Abraham and his willingness to sacrifice Isaac, and isn't that the same as saying, if God tells you to kill, it is in fact righteous and moral to obey? That reading has haunted Kierkegaard since the book was first published. And in my opinion, it's dangerously wrong. See, divine command theory says that whatever God commands is good simply because God commands it. It's a moral system built on obedience. If God says do it, then by definition, it's the right thing to do. There's no paradox, no anguish, no risk, but it is a theological argument. Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling is not about moral systems or about theology. It's about what happens when moral systems collapse, when the divine command is so absurd, so ethically impossible that the human mind can't contain it. The biblical Abraham, about to sacrifice his son Isaac, isn't a moral hero. He's a man standing on the knife's edge of despair. From the outside, he looks like a murderer. There's no way to explain or justify what he's doing. He can't prove his faith. He can't even speak of it. Kierkegaard calls this the theological suspension of the ethical, which is basically a fancy way of saying that Abraham's relationship with God moves beyond the universal rules of right and wrong. It's not that morality stops mattering, but that faith demands something even deeper, a personal, inward trust that cannot be shown to anyone else. And that's the key difference. Divine command theory says, God told me, therefore it's right. Kierkegaard says, God told me, and it tears my soul apart, but because of my faith, I obey. It's not about righteousness. It's about trembling. It's about the loneliness of faith when you can't explain why you're doing what you're doing, not to others, not even to yourself. And that brings us back to Phaedra. She doesn't know why the gods ask her to go into Darsanga and play the victim to this man, the Kierkegaard, and potentially empower him. She says, in fact, that this request is too much and she has to be prodded forward. She's angry. She has doubts. She resists. And then in silence, she consents, not because she understands, but because she believes. That's Kierkegaard's leap of faith, the moment when understanding ends and faith begins. It's not moral justification. It's existential surrender to something larger than yourself. And that distinction matters because fear and trembling has been twisted at times into a justification for fanaticism, for violence, for crusade, for jihad. But Kierkegaard would reject that completely. The true knight of the faith doesn't claim divine sanction. He can't. The moment you point to your act and say, I am right because God told me so, you've destroyed faith and replaced it with ideology. Abraham cannot explain himself. Phaedra cannot explain herself. And anyone who uses God's name to demand obedience or violence has left Kierkegaard behind. Faith in Kierkegaard's sense is inward, private, unprovable, and trembling. It doesn't make you powerful, it terrifies you. It doesn't give you moral certainty, it strips you of it. That's what makes Phaedra's choice so profound. She's not obeying because she thinks she's righteous or she's going to save the world. She's obeying because in the face of divine silence, she still believes that love, somehow, is worth the cost of obedience. And that's what brings us to one of the most fascinating intersections between Kierkegaard and Jacqueline Carey. For Kierkegaard, Abraham's faith exists in silence. It is an act so inward, so private, it cannot be explained. For Carey, that same paradox is reframed through the Darsanga Creed, love as thou wilt. Now, it's easy to hear love as thou wilt and think that it means indulgence, pleasure, or whatever desire you feel. And sometimes it does mean that. But in Kushiel's avatar, we see the true weight of that phrase. Love as thou wilt is not freedom from responsibility. It's a call to accept the impossible burden of love in all its forms: joy, pain, sacrifice, and faith. When Phaedra hears her God say, "If you do not go, we will leave you," she isn't being commanded to claim power or commit violence. She's being asked to love where love is unbearable, to bring compassion into hell itself. And this is where Carrie transforms Kierkegaard's terrifying paradox into grace. Abraham's leap of faith isolates him. Phaedra's leap binds her to others. Where Abraham acts in silence before an incomprehensible God, Phaedra acts in love so great it threatens to consume her. That's why when Ura Uzag says, "Your God must be a mighty warrior," she laughs and answers, "No, but he is a prodigious lover. In this place, it is the more dangerous of the two." And that line, which goes incredibly hard, but that line encapsulates the whole philosophy of Kushiel's avatar. Love is not gentle. It is not safe. It's an existential demand. It asks you to confront horror without surrendering compassion. It asks you to descend into the absurd, not because you are righteous, but because to refuse would be to lose the divine entirely. In the moment when Phaedra chose to obey the god's insane demand and travel into Darsanga to become the Kierkegaard's perfect victim, she became a Kierkegaardian knight of the faith. You know, when I read Fear and Trembling for this video, when I reread it, I thought it would hit different. When I first read the book, I was a Christian, and it spoke to my faith. But that was a while ago, and these days I'm a pretty flat atheist. I don't believe in souls anymore, even. So Fear and Trembling did hit me different on this reread, but I still found it as thought-provoking as I had all those years ago when I'd been fighting with my faith. As an atheist, it spoke to me about the meaning of life. Now, I believe we make our own meaning. In the tradition of Camus and Sartre, I believe that life doesn't inherently have any meaning. It's all up to us to give it meaning. And this is a philosophy I find very freeing. And what Fear and Trembling highlighted for me is that sometimes meaning, sometimes the root of what we want life to be, might supersede your moral code. It made me question what would force me to suspend my moral code. For example, I don't believe in killing people. But if my country was invaded, which is a non-zero possibility given that I'm Finnish, would I set aside that moral element of that element of my moral code in the greater service of love of country and my fellow Finns? And the answer is yes. Yes, I would. So that's what Fear and Trembling made me think of as an atheist. Anyway, back on point and back to the story. You shouldn't let me get sidetracked like that. We'll be here all day if I explore all the rabbit holes. All right, so we have Phaedra in Darsanga, where she finds Imriel, and Jocelyn serves as one of the Kierkegaard's warriors. And it is indeed utter hell on earth. Phaedra's nature makes it so that her body responds with desire to the Kierkegaard's cruel touch, and she hates that it does so. And yet, it's the only way that she can survive and the only way to get the Kierkegaard to love her, which turns out to be the key to defeating him. For if the Kierkegaard found his perfect victim, if he found someone to love and killed that person, he could open the floodgates of power, the gates to hell. But the sacrifice has to be made completely alone and in the dark, and so Phaedra hatches a plan along with the other women of the harem. On the night of the sacrifice, she has 2 sharp hairpins in her hair, and instead of the Kierkegaard killing her, she kills him in love and terror. and she closes the gates of hell instead of him opening them. And she loved him enough to weep over his death, but still kill him because he was a monster. It was an incredible moment, a conflict of love with a twisted version where the Kierkegaard seeks to dominate versus the Elohim love which promises freedom to love as you will, and Eloah prevailed. But not without cost, and that brings us to the second part of the book. Broken in many ways but alive, Jocelyn and Phedre and Imriel make their way out of Darsanga. Jocelyn and Phedre need to continue onward to find the name of God to free Hyacinth, and Imriel is to be taken back to Terre d'Ange by the others who accompanied Phedre. But Imriel has other ideas, and in Meneket, he runs away from those nobles and joins Jocelyn and Phedre on their quest through Jebe Barkal and onward to find the tribe of Dan and the name of God. Through the journey, the three of them become a family. And there's some healing in that, but Phedre and Jocelyn can't find a way to be intimate with each other. Too much has broken inside themselves and between them in Phedre submitting to the Kierkegaard and Jocelyn seeing her submit. But slowly, during the journey, they heal. And that brings us to my favorite scene in the book, the one that promises healing, the scene that says, even if you go through hell, you can find peace. It is possible to heal. And it all starts with a fish. I'm going to read that snippet. Jocelyn stood knee-deep in the rushing waters, clad only in a pair of white Jabean breeches. Sunlight gleamed on his loose, damp hair, the muscles working in his arms as he played out the line, hand over hand. Downstream, the mighty fish he'd hooked fought him, bucking and leaping, its sides flashing silver. I will own, I gasped when I saw the size of it. And on a sandbar in the middle of the river, Imriel jumped up and down with excitement, shouting instructions, clutching a stout branch in one hand. His black hair was plastered to his cheeks in coils, and he had stripped to his sodden breeches. I laughed. I couldn't help it. 'Twas an epic battle in its own way, though unfit for a poet's tale. When the line was played, Jocelyn began drawing it back in, fighting the fish for every inch of it. And how that fish fought! I saw it when it broke the water, silver-sided with a green back shading to black, fierce and vigorous, a true giant of the river. Imriel floundered into the depths, beating ineffectually at the waters with his club, and Jocelyn shouted him back, still hauling on the line. I'd have worried about crocodiles if I wasn't laughing so hard. And somewhere in the midst of it, my heart swelled to aching with love. So Jocelyn throws the fish down in front of Phedre and she kisses him, the first such moment between them in quite a while. And then, when he goes to clean up, Imriel convinces Phedre to follow Jocelyn to the pool. And she does, and I'll pick up the reading there. Jocelyn saw me and went still, water dripping from him in the sunlight. Even when I'd resented him, long ago, I thought him beautiful. He stood patient under my regard. Every one of the scars that marked him he'd gotten on my behalf. I did not have the words to speak to him. Phedre, he said at length, saying my name softly. Will you join me? I nodded, without speaking, and stayed where I was. He took a few steps, shadows in the hollows of his flanks, and lifted me from the rocks as if I weighed no more than his enormous fish, lowering me to stand before him. The skirts of my gown floated on the water, and I put both arms around his neck as he lowered his head to kiss me. That kiss I cannot describe. It was like a poem, a prayer, a homecoming unlooked for. It was like dungeon walls crumbling to reveal a glimpse of sky. It shook me to the very roots of my soul, All I could do was cling to him and gasp. And that leads into a scene way too spicy for YouTube, where they find healing and grace in each other. It is an incredible scene, described with the divine lingering in every act, where the broken parts are forged into a new whole. They are not removed, but they are healed. And we'll come back to this shortly, but first we need to wrap the story up before we talk about the final philosophical message. So, they reach the tribe of Dan and they go to find the name of God. And the people there, the tribe of Dan, are angry when Phaedra and Jocelyn basically sneak into their lake and try and find the name because they didn't want outsiders to go on this journey. And as our trio of heroes reach the island where the name of God is held in a temple, the gods of the tribe of Dan also reach them, and blood is spilt on the temple steps, and Imriel is threatened there because he spilled the blood. And in this moment, Phaedra offers her life for his. And as the soldier of the tribe of Dan lifts his sword to kill her, Imriel screams, high and piercing. And the temple door opens, and a tongueless priest steps out and stops the warrior, taking Phaedra into the temple. He tells her the name of God in a language no one can speak. And do you remember that phrase at the beginning? Make of the self a vessel where the self is not? That's where this finally comes into play, as we see in this passage. How long I laid upon the floor, I cannot say. I would have laid there forever, I think, if the priest had not roused me. His hands were gentle, insistent, shaking my shoulders. His eyes were kind. I could smell the dusty soil of the temple floor and the pall of incense. I could smell the peppers he had for dinner. I was alive, gravid with the sacred name. My body felt strange to me as the priest helped me to my feet. All the space in my mind was taken up by the name. It swelled the cords of my throat, and I had to clench my teeth to keep from speaking it. It would have destroyed me had I not found a place within myself where naught but love abided, simple and unencumbered. Only then had the priest in his wisdom opened the door. I marveled at the symmetry of the pattern. If I had not brought Imri out of the darkness of Darsanga, this brightness would never have come to pass. Truly, love was a wondrous force, now that I could perceive the complexities of its workings. Well, and so, the final act of the book is a return to Terre d'Ange, where Phaedra adopts Imriel, speaks the name of God, and frees Hyacinth. It is a very beautiful closing, and one that I read when I am in need of hope. But I want to go back and talk about that self as a vessel where the self is not, because this plays into the territory of the philosopher Simone Weil. And oh boy, am I bringing in the controversial philosophies today, because Simone is another who keeps getting read wrong, with people claiming her ideas are about nihilism, self-erasure, and death. But I don't believe that is at all what she was saying in her writings. So let's briefly explore decreation and the surrender of ego. Simone Weil was a French mystic and philosopher writing during the Second World War, and she coined the phrase decreation, which wasn't about destroying the self. It is about unmaking the ego, the small possessive part of us that always says, I want, I deserve, I control. She believed that true attention to the divine or to another being requires that we let go of that clutching I. To love purely is to make space, to become, in Kerry's words, a vessel where the self is not. In other words, to receive grace, we must first empty ourselves of pride, of fear, of the demand to be central. And that's exactly what happens to Phaedra over the course of the story, with its culmination in the temple of the tribe of Dan. She becomes decreated, her will silenced, her ego dissolved, until all that remains is love. The name of God doesn't inhabit her because she's powerful or chosen. It inhabits her because she's empty enough to hold it. It's also why the priest who gives her the name is tongueless. The divine can't be spoken, it can only be embodied. It's not about words or doctrines. It's about the kind of stillness that comes when you've laid yourself down completely for love's sake. Phaedra has spent 3 books surrendering the I, her body in Dart, her pride in Chosen, and finally herself in Avatar. And only when that surrender is complete, when she becomes a vessel, can she speak the name that frees another. And that, I believe, is what Simone Weil meant with decreation, not death, but rebirth of meaning after the ego is gone. Well, and so the story comes full circle. When Phaedra returns home and finally speaks the name of God to free Hyacinth, she isn't the same woman who began this journey. Hyacinth's freedom isn't just breaking of a curse. It's the release that happens when grace passes through one human being to another. It's what Simone Weil would call the miracle of attention, the moment when love becomes so focused, so selfless, that it bends reality around it. And that, to me, is the heart of Kushiel's Avatar. The whole book moves from faith as obedience, with Kierkegaard's leap into the absurd, to faith as surrender, Weil's still, wordless offering of the self. Phaedra's final act isn't about will, it's about yielding, trusting that the love she carries can restore what was broken. And that brings us back to the first book, where we heard the phrase, "that which yields is not always weak." And maybe that's the lesson tucked beneath all the pain and beauty and pleasure of these books. That to love deeply, to love in the way that Phaedra loves Hyacinth and Jocelyn and Imriel, and even the world, even when it hurts her, even the Kierkegaard. To love like that is to risk everything. And sometimes you must yield to that love to find grace. But loving that deeply, risking everything, allows you to participate in something vast, something that feels divine, even to an atheist like me. And that's my long and deep thoughts on Kushiel's Avatar and the Kushiel's Legacy series. If you enjoyed this series, hit the thumbs up button and let me know what you think of my analysis in the comments. Oh, and if you want more from me, I've written an epic fantasy series called Sangwil Chronicles, and one of the characters in there, called simply herself, is a homage to Melisande. When I was creating herself, I asked myself, but what if Melisande was a little more loyal, a little less ambitious, a little more focused on doing good? And I created Claire de la Roche, or herself. Follow the links down below if you want to explore how I did that. Next month on Actually It Is That Deep, we'll talk about Netflix's series Blue Eye Samurai and the philosophical themes that it surfaces in the first season. So I look forward to chatting with you then.